Scott jolted awake, his heart racing like crazy, almost like something had possessed him. The nightmare had been awful, but what he woke up to was even worse. A massive ant, way bigger than any ant should be, was literally chewing on his toes. He managed to shoo it away, only to face something even more terrifying. A huge spider crawling toward him out of the shadows. This wasn't some sci-fi movie or bad dream. This was Scott's actual reality. He'd caught some weird, rare disease that was making his body shrink until he was smaller than the bugs around him. The pets that used to be harmless now looked like bloodthirsty predators. Life hadn't always been this way for Scott. He'd had a good life, a happy family, everything a person could want. It all started when he went swimming alone in the ocean. He was just floating there on his back, looking up at the clouds, when he noticed them swirling in this strange spiral pattern. Right then, he felt this cold sensation, this creeping dread in his chest. In that moment, Scott suddenly understood how tiny and insignificant he really was in the grand scheme of things. And from that day forward, everything started changing. At first, it was small things. The shower head seemed higher than usual, like it had somehow moved up. His favorite shirt, the one that used to fit perfectly, suddenly felt loose and baggy. Initially, Scott didn't think much of it, but after a week, when he couldn't even wear that shirt anymore because it was drowning him, he started to worry. Something was definitely wrong. He went to the hospital right away. The news hit him hard. His height had dropped from 180 centimeters to 167 centimeters. The doctor tried to calm him down, saying it was normal, that bones and muscles naturally deteriorate with age. But Scott wasn't buying it. Every day, little things kept confirming what he already knew. He was shrinking, and fast. 20 days after that swim, things got worse. His wedding ring just slipped right off his finger while he was washing his hands. When he stood next to his wife Louise, he realized with horror that he was now almost half a head shorter than her. That's when it really hit him. This was serious. He rushed back to the hospital for more extensive testing. Everything came back normal except his height, which had dropped to 165 centimeters, and his weight was down too. The doctors were stumped. They'd never seen anything like it. His whole body was shrinking proportionally, organs and all. It wasn't in any medical textbook they knew. The doctor's words crushed him. Scott spent those days in psychological torment, waking up from nightmares where he could feel himself shrinking, completely powerless to stop it. For an entire month, Louise searched desperately for a cure. When she saw her husband had shrunk to the size of a baby, the fear in her eyes was unmistakable. She kicked their cat out of the house to protect him and sent their daughter Beth to study in her room. Then came the difficult conversation she'd been dreading. They'd need to sell the house to afford his treatments, which were costing a fortune. Scott refused flat out. The house, his room, these were the only places he still felt even remotely safe. Besides, he was sick of the endless tests and doctors repeating the same useless information. He decided he was done with hospitals and treatments. Louise broke down crying and left the room, heartbroken. After the argument, Scott sat alone with his thoughts. If this disease had no cure, then fine. He'd accept it. He decided to make the most of whatever time he had left. As they say, every cloud has a silver lining. Being small meant he could at least be a living doll for his daughter. But even that joy was short-lived. Normal sounds, like regular conversation, became deafening to his tiny ears. He was literally the size of an insect now. To prove to himself he could still manage, he fashioned a climbing tool out of a fishing hook. But as luck would have it, disaster struck again. He heard the cat meow behind him. That same cat that used to be so cute now looked like a terrifying monster. Scott's whole body trembled. In his panic, the fishing hook scratched his stomach, drawing blood. He ripped off his bloody clothes and turned to see the cat licking its chops, clearly eyeing him as prey. He grabbed a sewing needle like it was a sword and ran to hide in a crack under the wardrobe. But the cat wasn't giving up. It stuck its massive paw into the crack, clawing at him. Scott kept backing up in terror until suddenly the floor gave way and he plummeted into the basement. Luckily, he landed on some plastic sheeting, which cushioned the fall. He was dizzy but not seriously hurt. When Louise came home and couldn't find him, she searched everywhere frantically. Scott screamed for her from below, but his voice sounded like a distant cricket chirp. She couldn't hear him. When she found his bloody clothes, she jumped to the worst conclusion. The cat must have gotten to him. As he watched her gather her things and leave the house, Utterly devastated, Scott felt like his soul was being ripped from his body. This helplessness was worse than death. The stairs that used to be nothing were now like impossible mountains he could never climb. He found an old rag to wrap around himself and started exploring the dark basement. Even though he knew he was trapped, he made himself a promise. He wouldn't just sit there waiting to die. He'd fight until his last breath. Scott remembered the water tank pipe leaked, which solved his thirst problem and gave him a way to clean his wound. He spent that first night shivering in the cold darkness. When morning came, he screamed for help, hoping someone might hear. But then the harsh reality set in. Even if he could somehow climb those impossibly tall stairs, he'd never be able to open that heavy basement door. He decided to use his brain to find another way out. He spotted a piece of bread in the corner and used a large thread to spell out his name on the first step of the stairs. Surely someone would notice a sign like that, he thought. After exhausting himself with that task, he looked for food. He remembered setting a mousetrap a few days ago, and the cheese on it should still be good. He used the needle to shoo away the ants that had gathered on it. But he wasn't stupid. He knew he had to disable the trap first so it wouldn't kill him. He found a nail and struck the spring mechanism to close it safely. Once he was sure it was disabled, he dove into the cheese hungrily. While he was eating, a spider suddenly appeared. Scott waved the needle at it to scare it off. Since he was still slightly bigger than the spider, it backed away nervously. But this encounter was a wake-up call. The basement was like a jungle filled with predators. Spiders, insects, rats, ants. Any of them could kill him in an instant. Scott worked tirelessly until he was drenched in sweat, finally carving out a small opening in a cardboard box to use as a bedroom. He used a torn book page to block the entrance and finally got some sleep. Time dragged on. Whenever hunger hit, he'd nibble on the cheese. He could hear people walking around upstairs, but nobody thought to come down to the basement. His heart sank. If no one rescues me, I'll die here, he thought. The cheese was almost gone, and worse, he was still shrinking. To survive longer, Scott decided to take the offensive and kill the spider while he still had a size advantage. But the spider was clever. It circled around and ambushed him from behind. Caught off guard, Scott stumbled and fell into a fish tank. Fortunately, the goldfish inside was peaceful and didn't bother him. He crawled out, soaking wet and battered. This time, he tried using a bottle cap as a distraction. But the spider's senses were too sharp. It ignored the cap and went straight for Scott. After several rounds of fighting and running, Scott realized with dread that he was no longer strong enough to beat the spider. He kept backing up, defending himself with the needle, until he was cornered with nowhere to go. At the last second, he spotted a wood splinter on the floor, grabbed it, and drove it into the spider's body with everything he had. The spider recoiled in pain and retreated into the darkness. Catching his breath, Scott gathered some shredded paper and grabbed a matchstick that was now as tall as he was. He ran back and forth, creating friction against the ground until it ignited into a small flame. The warmth felt incredible, and he felt safe for a moment. Surely the spider wouldn't come near fire. Alone in the dark, he couldn't stop thinking about his daughter and how much he missed her. 20 days passed like wind. Despite daily exercises, his body kept shrinking at an alarming rate. One day, the basement door finally opened. His heart soared with hope, but it wasn't Louise or Beth. It was a real estate agent. Scott covered his ears in pain. The man's footsteps sounded like earthquakes. When the man left and darkness returned, Scott understood. Louise was selling the house. She'd never come back down here. Suddenly, he heard buzzing behind him, a mosquito flying toward him. Scott braced for a fight, but the mosquito flew out through the window screen. That's when it clicked. He was about the size of a mosquito now, which meant he could fit through those screen holes too. He looked at a toy soldier nearby that now seemed giant compared to him. This was his chance. He ate the last piece of cheese and started climbing the furniture legs like a mountain. After nearly exhausting himself completely, he reached the tabletop. Looking down, the floor seemed impossibly far away, like staring into a deep canyon. He shook off the fear and, with a brave leap, jumped into a crack in the wall. But his relief was short-lived. A few steps in, he ran into a spider web blocking his path. He tried to slip past without touching it, but his shoulder brushed a strand. The spider felt the vibration and came running. Cold sweat poured down Scott's face as he watched the monster approach. He He backed away in terror, but just then, a flying insect got caught in the web. The spider immediately turned its attention to the bigger meal. After that close call, Scott took a deep breath and ran toward the window. But he hit a snag, literally. His body was still slightly too big to fit through the screen opening. He didn't panic, though. At the rate he was shrinking, it would only be a matter of time. Sure enough, the next morning he woke to sharp pain. The spider was back and determined to get him. This time, Scott squeezed himself through the screen opening and made it to the other side. The spider could only watch from behind the screen, frustrated at losing its meal. Before he knew it, night had fallen. Scott walked alone through the garden grass, which now seemed like a tropical jungle to him. He saw a giant moth dancing in the air, and tears welled up in his eyes. Sure, he'd done the impossible and escaped, but Louise and Beth had already moved somewhere he didn't know. At his current size, finding them again was nothing more than a fantasy. But one thing gave him peace. His daughter was somewhere looking at the same sky, the same stars he was seeing. Scott felt a strange calm wash over him. He realized that in this vast universe, whether you're a giant or the size of an ant, all humans are incredibly small. The only real difference was the beautiful memories he'd made with his daughter. He knew that as long as he held on to those memories, his tiny life would have meaning and would shine in its own way. And that's where the story ends. Thank you for watching.